Okay, today we're talking about cultural evolution, chapter 3 in your textbook. Let me punch this button. There we go. Cultural evolution. Different environments affect the ways that people go about living their lives. Some of the ways that physical environments affect culture are quite direct. A good example would be, well, as you can see, this young man is in fairly green mountains. Where you guys live? You guys live in Arizona. There's high desert and there's low desert, I guess, around Phoenix. It gets pretty hot in Phoenix. It gets hot here too, but there's a lot more humidity here. Your heat is dry heat. Ours is moist heat. We have a longer growing season than you do. We grow a lot of food here in Iowa. As a matter of fact, I live in the middle of a cornfield. I have a cornfield on one side and a bean field on the other side. Soybean field. Very much different from your environment. As a matter of fact, my wife we went for a walk around our property. We have about 5 acres, and we walked around it this morning. And she walked around it barefoot because the grass is so thick and lush. Something I wouldn't even think of doing in your area, walking around barefoot, because there are so many plants that have stickers. You have rocks and whatnot. Anyway, so as you can imagine, if you live in this part of the world, you can wander around without any shoes on. It's very easy to do that. Where you live, probably not the best idea. There are no large indigenous mammals on the Hawaiian Islands, therefore the Hawaiians do not have any hunting traditions. The Kung of the Kalahari live in an environment surrounded by large animals and derive much of their caloric intake by hunting them. The Kung I'm supposed to make a click, and that's what this thing is all. That's what this thing is all about. I'm supposed to make a click with my tongue, but I can't do that. Your language has a similar click, but I can't do it. The Kung have a strong hunting tradition because, well, much of their caloric intake comes from hunting these large animals. The kinds of foods that are available within a given ecology affect the kinds of foraging behaviors that people engage in. And of course, this is a picture of someplace, I'm not sure, but they're eating squirrels. Reading your history, large animal, there weren't that many large animals where you are. So you guys ate rabbits and you ate other rodents. Here somebody is going to eat a squirrel. And as you can see, they've got lots and lots of berries, and these are apples and mushrooms, and these are blueberries. These are hazelnuts. These are pokeberries, and I thought they were poisonous, but I guess they're probably not. So people living in where we are, all these things grow wild here. I haven't seen any. That's a fox squirrel. I haven't seen any fox squirrels because I live in the middle of a cornfield. It's too far away from other forests in order to see. Oh, my dogs would love it if they had squirrels here. According to Gilmore, 1990, in those cultures where the environment is harsh and requires courage and physical prowess to secure a living, cultures of masculinity that value the strength and the toughness of males are more likely to emerge. And of course, we see this any place where there's a lot of hunting that takes place. Masculinity has a lot to do with that. The males tend to be more machismo, I guess, in those areas, places where it's a lot easier. And maybe this has something to do with the concept of metrosexuality in environments like this one, where there's a lot of farmers, where people hunt. The concept of masculinity is different. It's really kind of interesting. I raised my kids in Nebraska, and when my daughter first she moved to Arizona. And I was talking to her candidly. This is before she ever had a baby or before she got married. Uh, and I was talking to her before when she was just dating people, and she said, "Dad, there's this Phoenix doesn't have a lot." She was living in Tempe. She said Phoenix doesn't have a lot of very masculine men. And then she moved to Germany, and she met somebody when she was in the Air Force, of course. When you're in the military, there's a lot of testosterone splashing around the military. But when she came back, she got married to one of the people that she was around. And when he came back to the States, being in Germany and of course being in the military, he got out of the service, and all of a sudden he changed. He wasn't nearly as physical as he was when he was in the military. He started acting like he did when he was in high school, and of course he was from Cleveland, and she didn't like it. She didn't think he was acting. He wasn't acting the way she wanted him to act. Anyway, they eventually got a divorce. She moved down to Florida, and for years she complained that the men in Florida she thought they were all gay because they were just not as masculine as the people she grew up with. Anyway, as weird as that sounds, so maybe this has something to do with metrosexuality. This whole concept. There was a television show about a decade ago called Men in Trees, and it was about a lady that for some reason gets stuck in Alaska, and she's from New York City, and she gets stuck in Alaska for one reason or another. And she starts commenting on the fact that the men in Alaska are far more macho. And of course, she makes fun of them in the beginning. Then eventually, she kind of picks up on this, and she likes it. She likes the idea that these men are a lot more masculine than than the men in New York City or the men on the East Coast or whatever. Really kind of fascinating. Men in Trees is the name of it. Had starred Anne Hesh. Anyway, not important. Places where large game is hunted. That's where macho men live. Macho men. Okay, so anyway, places where risky deep sea fishing is performed. On the South Pacific island of Truk, men traditionally have to go on dangerous deep sea fishing expeditions to secure food for their families. The Truckies greatly value masculinity, which is manifested by young men engaging in frequent violent, drunken melees with knives and clubs. In cultures where the environment is more benign and food is plentiful and more easily acquired, more androgynous gender roles are more likely to emerge. Men in Tahiti do not need to hunt and fish because fish are readily available in the shallow lagoons. So there's no tradition of hunting and fishing. There's virtually no warfare and feuding on Tahiti, and there is little evidence that masculinity is a matter of much concern with the Tahitians. The harsher the environment and the scarcer the resources, the more manhood is stress. Environment shapes lifestyle. So if you think about Tahiti, men wouldn't have to compete for reproductive rights. Since they don't have to compete for reproductive rights, they would use other criteria women would use other criteria to select men as their mates. Whereas in an environment that we were talking about before, where there's deep sea fishing or where you have to hunt large game, of course, the individual that could support their family would be the individual that could hunt buffalo or whatever, could bring home the meat, as it were. And of course, on Tahiti, you don't have to worry about that. So the reproductive criteria would be completely different in an environment such as Tahiti. In 1532, Juan Pizarro and 168 soldiers met with the Incan Emperor Atahualpa and captured the emperor and killed 7,000 Incan warriors. 168 soldiers killed 7,000 Incan warriors. Within a year, the Spaniards won battle after battle against impossible odds and conquered the Incan Empire. This is one of those things that we need to think about. Now, why and how in the world did all of this take place? How did Pizarro take over an area that was so highly populated? They were fairly warlike. So, what in the world happened? Proximal means direct and immediate. Proximal cause of the Spanish success would be the Spanish political organization drew on the thousands of years of written history, ocean-going ships, steel swords and armor, horses, and smallpox decimating the Incans. And this is a picture of the attack, the Spanish attack on Sacsayhuaman, which is just north of Machu Picchu. Just north, no, it's not. That's Cuzco. Just north of Cuzco. Machu Picchu is about 60 miles down the road, but this is up at about 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet. You guys live, if you live in Saley, Saley is at about 7,250, I think. So when we went up to Sacsayhuaman, of course, we went from Lima, which is on the coast, which is at 0 feet above sea level, we went up to Cuzco, and Cuzco is at about 7,500 feet, 100 feet, 7,000 feet, 7 to 8,000 feet above sea level. So it was quite a change, as interesting as that is. Anyway, I've actually been there. That's Sacsayhuaman. Distal means long term and indirect. The Spaniards came from a history of environments with food sources that supported large populations. The Fertile Crescent in the Middle East grows wheat, barley, peas, and lentils. That's where sheep come from. That's where goats came from. There were pigs that they were able to domesticate, donkeys and cows, and of course that fed a lot of people. Such strong agricultural endeavors enabled the formerly nomadic people to adopt more sedentary lifestyles, which in turn allowed them to seek scientific improvements. The domestication of various animals allowed the people in the Eurasian area to live in close proximity with animals for thousands of years. Now, this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. One of the reasons it's good is because it allows you to feed a lot of people. You're producing your own protein, in essence, and that allows you to produce a lot of people. But unfortunately, the bad thing was that when you live with your livestock like that, you tend to trade diseases back and forth. And of course, just like the coronavirus potentially came from, we're not exactly sure where it came from, but we think it came from bats, and that bats gave it to an animal called the pangolin. And then the pangolin, it mutated inside the pangolin, and then the pangolin gave it to humans, and of course, we have no way of fighting it off at this point, since we're not used to pangolin diseases. Because of this proximity, diseases developed and were traded back and forth between the Eurasians and the animals, so that animal diseases now affected humans. And this is where almost all these viral infections, measles, mumps, chickenpox, smallpox, tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is actually a bacterial infection, but smallpox, influenza, and measles are all viral infections. And of course, they've killed millions and millions of people over the centuries, especially when they were brought to the New World and to the Americas, because there was no natural immunity against any of these diseases. All these viral diseases had come from Europe, and so the Europeans spread them throughout this petri dish of the Americas. For thousands of years, diseases swept through the cities and towns of Eurasia, killing off millions, but leaving populations of people immune to these scourges. And of course, this is a problem with coronavirus. Nobody's immune to it, potentially. But we find out that there may be some people that are actually immune to the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, because they have come in contact with other coronaviruses that may potentially have triggered their immune system to fight off the coronavirus. This may be what's happening to me. I'm not susceptible to the novel coronavirus because I was in a coronavirus epidemic when I was in the service in the early 1980s. Now that was 40 years ago, but the reality may be that I'm not susceptible to it because when I was dealing with the walking pneumonia back in 1980, 1981, it was a coronavirus. It theoretically is. They told us it was a coronavirus. We're not exactly sure. And it did kill a couple people, but of course we quarantined. This was in Germany. We quarantined the people. I came in contact with it because I was one of the medics. I was a lab tech, and I dealt with this stuff. And the way that we identified it was by drawing the blood on the individual and doing a thing called a SED rate. So I came in contact with not only the people but also with their blood. So potentially I came in contact with that coronavirus. I didn't develop walking pneumonia, but we're not sure. When these diseases were introduced to the uninitiated populations in the Americas, the lack of immunity wiped out whole nations. The white clay people of Montana, who were at the time were allied with the Blackfeet against the Sioux. They talk about having 600 lodges. 600 lodges is about 6 to 10,000 people. They were reduced to 60 when smallpox first struck them. 60 would be about 600 to 1,000 people. So they went from 6,000 to 10,000 people to 600 to 1,000 people, all in a space of one winter. Burial had to take place in trees. They normally buried their dead in crevices and rocks. They were burying people in trees, and there aren't that many trees up in Montana, let me tell you. So it was pretty ugly. There were just too many people to bury in the crevices. China is a large country in Eastern Asia. That's where China is. This is Korea right here. This is Japan. This is Taiwan, I believe. Anyway, yeah, this is China. So this big chunk right here is China. In the north, the people eat and grow wheat. I mean, we think of the Chinese as rice eaters, and that's true. This the southern portion of China are rice eaters. But the people in the north grow and eat wheat. In the south, where it's warmer and more humid, they grow and eat rice. Because there is a vast difference between growing rice and wheat, the two areas have developed different social structures. Rice is cultivated in paddies, plots of standing water. We ran into this when we were in Asia. There has to be sufficient rainfall where it is channeled through irrigation canals. This requires a great deal of coordination and cooperation between farmers. Rice farming is labor intensive, often requiring work by whole families. Wheat farming is done in fields that rarely require irrigation. A wheat farmer does not have to cooperate with his neighbors. Wheat farming is far less labor intensive. So you can imagine people who live in the southern portion of China, they require cooperation. The people in the north, not so much. So they actually develop different personalities, as weird as that may sound. Looking at people from northern and southern China, researchers have discovered that rice growers from the south showed more interdependent thinking styles. They saw themselves as part of a network. They were tolerant of nepotism. They engaged in more holistic reasoning. And if I can make this thing work, and there it goes. Okay, we're good. Okay. So you really learn about the difference between Chinese, northerners and southerners. 美女，能给我你的电话号码吗？ Who's from the north? the north.
干杯！ Come on, pussy！
The lady from the south.
亲爱的，要不要来一点？
可是我喝一点点就会很晕嘞。
就来一点点啦。啊
See your face turn red. We'll talk about that later.
这是我特意为你做的。
哇塞，你好厉害呀，亲爱的！
哎，怎样？怎样？哎，What's your problem？
别打了！
哎，Go！ 我抱歉了，哎，你What's your problem？ 哎，你还是
好恐怖，我不敢睡。
哎，亲爱的，能不能先不要看了这个？
这有什么好怕？抢我包！好讨厌！ 哇塞，你看这个男的长得很帅，有没有？干杯！干杯！干杯！
Okay, so you can see there's a difference between people from the north and people in the south. People in the north are far more independent. People in the south are more cooperative. And they are more sensitive to things than people in the north. I don't know if personally, I'm not sure exactly who. Don't think I'd want to date either one of them personally. Then again, I'm married and I don't have to worry about it. Evoked culture is the idea that people, no matter where they are from, have certain biological encoded behavioral patterns that can be evoked when a certain circumstance arises. When threatened, the capacity to act in an intimidating manner is universally present, especially when loved ones are threatened. Another example of evoked culture is attractiveness in a mate. People around the world prefer mates who are physically attractive. Attracted people are less likely to have parasites. Attracted people are healthier. Thus, humans have inherited preferences for attractive mates. When there is little threat from parasites or an unhealthy environment, other criteria can be used to select a mate: intelligence, kindness, and sense of humor. In areas that are unhealthy, attractiveness is of prime importance. When people learn cultural practices by social learning or by modeling others, it is known as transmitted culture. If you watch your neighbor growing tomatoes in a hanging pot, you have learned such planting practices by observation. Despite the fact that the Dinka and the Nuer have lived beside each other for hundreds of years, and they are both nomadic cattle herders and eat the same foodstuffs and descended from the same ancestors 1,000 years ago, their cultures are different. The Nuer raise large herds of cattle and live off the milk. The Dinka butcher their herds and rely on the meat. The Dinka maintain tribal relationships with the families they live near. The Nuer maintain kinship based on the male line. The Nuer are a larger and more militaristic tribe. The Nuer maintain costly, inflexible dowry payments for their daughters, while the Dinka have small, flexible payments. Biological evolution occurs when certain genes become more common in a population than they were in the past. Biological evolution operates through natural selection. Natural selection is the evolutionary process that occurs under these conditions. Individual variability exists among members of a species on certain traits. The traits are associated with different reproductive rates. The traits have a hereditary basis. Fast-running antelope have an advantage in outrunning predators. The trade-off would be that their increased muscle mass would require increased food to maintain them. Slow-running antelope may be more susceptible to predators, but in a time of drought, when the food sources are limited, they're more likely to survive than the fast-running antelope. Cultural evolution is where ideas are carried forward from generation to generation. Cultural evolution follows natural selection, as some ideas are more selectable in a culture than others. And two of these ideas that seem to wander forward are political structures and religions. Copying errors are very common with cultural ideas. Copying errors or mutations are rare among genes. But of course, the ideas are the same. This is what bathing outfits look like. Oops, I'm sorry. This is what bathing outfits look like in the evolutionarily. As you can see, they were very highly dressed in 1875. They got skimpier and skimpier as time went by. 1890, they were completely covered. Now their arms are uncovered. All of a sudden, in 1925, of course, with the Roaring Twenties, they were showing their legs, but they still had something on their legs. And then in 1927, of course, they were showing a lot more skin. Genes pass slowly. Genes pass vertically from parent to offspring. Culture passes horizontally from one person to anyone they come in contact with. Cultural evolution can be very rapid. While genes have to be adaptive to be repeated, cultural ideas do not have to be adaptive. Even maladaptive ideas can spread, as with the headhunters of New Guinea, when half of them died due to a degenerative disease passed from diseased victims. And this was Jacob Creutzfeldt disease, or the mad cow's disease. They were eating the brains of their enemies, and because they ate them, and because this Jacob Creutzfeldt disease was in there, half of them died of mad cow disease. As sad as that may be. Dynamic social impact theory posits that individuals come to influence each other, and they do so primarily in terms of how often the individuals interact, which ultimately leads to clusters of like-minded people who are separated by geography, cultures, in other words. And of course, this is a movie. I can't remember which movie that is. Whoops, I'm sorry. Which movie that is, but this had to do with a fraternity and sororities getting together. And of course, that was a like-minded clusters that we're talking about, people with those ideas. That's Zac Efron there, by the way. Norms develop among those who communicate with each other regularly, and that was the idea. In 2007, Callum and Harton followed a group of students for a year. The researchers set a baseline by discovering the students' attitudes before they became students. The researchers discovered that the students that lived in the same dorms and ate in the same dining halls maintained similar attitudes, no matter what attitudes they had before coming to school. The students began building microcultures within their living units. Cultures emerge when people communicate. And of course, this happened to me, and I've talked about it before. I was actually a Republican before I went to college, and then I was in the dormitory. Didn't like the idea that the fraternities were segregated, so I went into the dormitory. I became enmeshed in the civil rights movement. This is in 1967. Civil rights had been taking place since the 50s, but it kind of became a little bit more militant in the late 1960s, and of course I became a civil rights advocate because I was the people that I was living with in the dormitory were African American, and most of my friends, many of my friends, I had friends who were of all different groups, but some of my friends were African American, and since they were part of the civil rights movement, they invited me to go along with them, and that became part of what I did as a college person. Would be really hard to be to fight for civil rights if you have the attitude of a Republican. That was not something that they did. Civil rights was pretty much a Democrat thing to do. Contemporary legends are simply fictional stories that are told in modern societies as they are true. This is one of the things that's going on right now. The internet is spreading a lot of rumors and ideas, these strange conspiracy theories. Most of them are easily destroyed, but strangely, this administration adheres to a lot of these very odd contemporary legends. One contemporary legend is the conspiracy theories. Booby-trapped Halloween candy is one such contemporary legend. There have only been 80 documented cases since 1959 of individuals booby-trapping Halloween candy. Colonies of released alligators live in the sewers of New York City. New York is too cold for alligators to survive in the winter. The sewers are full of toxic waste that would not support reptilian life. Therefore, that is a urban legend. It's a contemporary legend. HIV-infected needles are being left in return slots to contaminate an unsuspecting person. There's never been a recorded case of anyone contracting HIV from being stuck by a needle in a coin return slot. And of course, these contemporary legends, these conspiracy theories, people put them on the internet and somebody else believes them. QAnon, of course, is one of those conspiracy groups that keeps publishing different ideas. And strangely enough, if you know anything about QAnon, one of the things they do is they put feelers out there. They'll drop these little pieces of information, and what they do, they expect you to interpret the conspiracy. So some people will interpret it as fairly benign, and other people will assume that it means there's going to be revolution in a matter of days. It really all depends on your mindset, your paranoia, I guess, as to how you feel. Researchers have found that rumors and legends are more likely to spread when they can evoke shared emotional reaction among people. The characters from fiction that are the most memorable are the ones that evoke emotion in us. And of course, this is a picture of Robin Hood, a fictional character that never existed. Emotional ideas are more likely to spread through a culture than are unemotional ones. This is why our news is full of sensational stories of rescues, disasters, and wrecks, rather than mundane things that happen every day. And of course, this is a picture of the same place. One is before and the other is after an earthquake in that Italian, I think it's Italy, it may be Albania. Anyway, the Fulani of Africa believe that the world was created from a drop of milk, and this is one of the creation stories of the people of Africa. As you can see, well, a drop of milk. Japanese mythology states that the world was created from brine dripping from the tip of the jewel spear of heaven, and you can see the jewel spear of heaven dropping a drop of brine. Brine is salt water. Judeo-Christian beliefs state that God created the heavens and earth in 6 days. That's Genesis. The kinds of stories that are especially likely to persist in our memories are ones that contain a few minimally counterintuitive ideas. Minimally counterintuitive means that they are statements that are surprising and unusual in the sense that they violate our expectations, but are not too outlandish, even though that seems to be a silly way to build a boat. Does globalization mean that we are destined to all become citizens of a homogeneous world culture? Probably not. The trend toward globalization is simultaneously paralleled by an opposing trend toward increasing tribalism. And of course, we have seen this over and over again. The end of World War II, everybody came together. We were rebuilding Germany. We were rebuilding Japan. We were trying to put Europe back together. And all of a sudden, we had two conflicting ideas. It's us against them. Who were the us's this time? Well, us had to do with democracy. If you remember, World War II was the fascists, Italy, Japan, and Germany, and then some of the Baltic states that followed fascist ideas. So it was the fascists versus the rest of the world, and of course the Nazis were able to take over most of Europe, along with the Italians, and England, of course, was fighting against them. The people of Europe had already been conquered. The English, the Russians, and the United States were the three major countries fighting against the fascists. But of course, one of our allies their political ideas were different from the English, and the Americans were mostly democratic. They were communists. The Russians were communists. So once the war ended, we started dicing up the world democracies. Of course, fascism was gone, but it was democracies versus communism, and of course the Russians, the Soviet Union, of course, they were the Soviet Union back then. Soviet Union took most of Eastern Europe, and the democracies took the rest of Europe. Then they started fighting over Africa. They started fighting over countries in South America. They started fighting over Asia. And the Chinese became communists. The Chinese communists took over China. And it looked like they may be spreading, into Malaysia, into Vietnam. It's the reason the Vietnam occurred. It's the reason that the Korean War happened. It's the reason that the Vietnam War happened. It was this idea that communism, if we didn't stop it, if we didn't fight against it, that they would take over the whole world. And of course, as people who are from a democracy, we were fighting against that. All that's gone now. There are only two communist countries left. Two communist countries, Cuba and, there's three. Cuba, North Korea, and China. And then everybody else, and kind of the Russians. It's, the Russians are kind of a toss-up. Anyway, a lot of weird stuff going on. The tribalism is still there. We can look at American Indians and we can talk about tribalism. And the reason I say that is because in the 1970s and into the 1980s, there was a movement among American Indians, this concept of pan-Indianism, this idea that all the tribes should get together and fight for their treaty rights. And of course, the idea was that they had already mixed everybody together in boarding schools. So we really didn't identify, American Indians theoretically. This is one of the arguments. The idea was that they didn't really identify with the tribe as much as they identified with the fact that they were American Indians. So there was this movement going on, in the United States. And then, of course, it all filtered back, and people said, no, my tribe is more important uh, than uh, than fighting for all Indian rights. It was really kind of an odd situation. Uh, it lasted into the night and into the 21st century. Um, lot of interesting arguments taking place. So if you read a book about American Indians in the from the 1990s, you might read about this concept that we all have to fight together in order to keep from disappearing, and that was the idea of pan-Indianism. Of course, that is no longer a viable idea, even for people who have a lot of different tribes in their ancestry. It gets really interesting. It's kind of a fascinating argument. Ethnically diverse cities such as New York, Singapore, Toronto, and Sydney are microcosms of the world at large in many ways. Each has many distinct ethnic enclaves coexisting within their boundaries. Thus, there are trends toward cultural heterogeneity globally, while there is a trend toward cultural homogeneity at the local level. Cultures that are individualistic include a variety of practices and customs that encourage individuals to place their own personal goals ahead of those of the collective and to consider how they are distinct from others. Tracking children at school is an individualistic idea. Workers being given meritocratic pay at the office. College-age children being encouraged to move out of their parents' homes. Employees being given individual cubicles. These are all very individualistic ideas. Meritocracies, tracking children at school, children moving away and finding their own lives. I've talked about this. This was the plan in my family. As a matter of fact, that's what the kids wanted more than the parents, of course. They wanted to move out and create their own families. And then this is an idea, employees being given their own cubicles, not working together, not everybody being an individual. People choosing to put their elderly relatives in retirement homes. Collectivistic cultures include many cultural practices, institutions, and customs that encourage individuals to place more emphasis on collective goals, the goals of one's in-group. Children sleeping with their parents, this is a collectivist idea. Classes of school children being promoted together to the next grade regardless of the performance of some individual children. Marriages being arranged by parents. Companies compensating their employees on the basis of how long they have been employed rather than meritocracy. Extended families living under one roof. Many surveys reveal that Americans feel more financially pressed than before, even though real incomes have been rising and time pressures have increased as two-career families have become common. Putnam in 2000 speculates that individualism has increased 10%. Suburbanization is another reason for increased individualism in the United States, according to Putnam, and this factor is also at 10%. Suburbanization results in people spending more time in their cars and in their homes and less time with friends and neighbors. And this is really kind of interesting because when we moved to Iowa from Montana, we had to choose between a house that was about 10 miles away from campus, from the Ashford campus, and we had to choose, or one that was 35 miles away from campus. And of course, because we didn't want to live in a suburban area, we wanted to live in a rural area, we chose the house that was 35 minutes away rather than the one that was 10 or 12 miles away. The second largest culprit to increased individualism among Americans at 25% is electronic entertainment, especially television, which leads people to isolate themselves and engage in more passive forms of entertainment. Of course, this Putnam wasn't dealing with social media nearly as much. I mean, Putnam was doing his research in 2000. The internet was invented in 1993. So it was 7 years old at the time of Putnam's research. And of course, one of the things that we have seen since we are in 2020 is that social media is huge. TikTok and Skyping and Twitter, Facebook. I guess MySpace is not, nobody does MySpace anymore. Anyway, there's tons of different things, and people are isolating themselves, and they're living in their own little worlds. It's getting worse as far as news is concerned. Once upon a time, you either watched ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, and that was pretty much it. But now, of course, with Fox News being the conservative news network and CNN being, and MSNBC being the liberal news network, you choose which news you accept by watching different news programs. Putnam in 2000 discovered that the younger generations even watch TV differently from the way that their parents and grandparents do, as they are more likely to turn the TV on even if there is nothing in particular that they have in mind to watch. The older generations are more likely to watch TV only when there is a particular show that they want to see. This drives me crazy. I go over to my daughter's house and the television will be on, but nobody's watching it. It's just making noise. And people are off doing something. My daughter will be cooking, or my grandson is playing Fortnite or whatever. Anyway, it just drives me nuts that there's all this noise, but there's nobody's paying attention to it. Now, the part that really drives me crazy is if I turn off the televisions because nobody's watching it, then my daughter comes in and says, "I was listening to that," as if she can hear it from the kitchen. Approximately half of the variance behind the increasing individualism rests with the different lifestyles between the younger and the older generations, and this is one of the things that Putnam discovered in 2000. One of the most remarkable findings regarding cultural change is that people seem to be getting smarter. On average, across all cultures for which there is longitudinal data, people in the current generation have higher IQ scores than those from earlier generations. Why would that be? Well, one reason may have something to do with the fact that you have all the information that you need at your fingertips. If you've got a telephone or you've got a computer, then you can Google any piece of information that you want. Now, normally, probably 80% of it is actually accurate. The rest of it may be questionable. But here you have all this information at your fingertips. I scored fairly high on my IQ test when I was young, mainly because we had an encyclopedia at home. And if I had a question, I could go to the encyclopedia and look it up. But you don't even have to look it up. All you have to do is ask Google, and Google will tell you any of the information that you could possibly want. The trend of intelligence rising has been dubbed the Flynn effect after the researcher who first identified it. And there's Dr. Flynn right there. He first identified it in 1987, and then he replicated his results in 1994. A review of changes in IQ scores in 14 nations revealed that the average increase in IQ was between 5 and 25 points per generation. A generation is kids that are about 10 years apart, I guess. It's the people that you went to high school with, not just the people in your grade, but the people that were in junior high, the people that were seniors when you were freshmen. All those people are your generation. According to Healy in 1990, most TV programming communicates at about a fourth grade vocabulary level. Unless you watch Big Bang Theory, of course. And that may be one of the reasons why Big Bang was so popular, was because they were talking about things that people had never heard before. They were talking about physics questions and physics problems. And some people really enjoyed that. My son really enjoyed it because he's a mathematician, and he would read their boards to find out if they were accurate, and they were accurate as far as he's concerned. He's as a mathematician, he understands physics as well. So he put all that together. It was really kind of fun for him. It's kind of fun for me because these are things that I'm curious about. I learned some things by watching Big Bang Theory. It's really kind of fascinating. It was on for what, 11, 12, 13 years? I can't remember. Anyway, good show. No longer on. Of men born in 1890, only 27% had more than an eighth grade education, and only 9% had any schooling after high school. I told you about my grandfather. My grandfather was born in the 19th century. He was going to school, I guess, in about the 1890s, and he only made it to the third grade, but he was a fairly intelligent individual. Fairly innovative. He didn't go to high school. So when my dad wanted to go to high school, my dad was born in 1918. When he wanted to go to high school in the 30s, of course, the Depression was going on. But my grandfather said, no, you don't need it. As far as he was concerned, the eighth grade was far enough for my dad. And my dad, of course, had to pay him room and board in order to go to high school, for him to be allowed to go to high school. In 2012, the percentage of Americans over 25 who had more than an eighth grade education was approximately 94%. 58% had some schooling after high school, and approximately 11% had graduate degrees. Now, I have 3 graduate degrees. My wife has 2. All of these things are important, I guess. 11% of the population, that's 1 out of every 10, has graduate degrees. Throughout the 20th century until the last couple of decades, people are able to get by with as little as an eighth grade education. In the 21st century, it takes some college to get by, and there is an ever-growing proportion obtaining graduate degrees. And of course, one of the reasons why we were educated the way that we were, I was educated in the 50s and the 60s, they expected us to go to work in the factories or to go back to work on the farms. They were educating us to work, to be those workers, to be these workers, actually. And of course, some of us went in another direction. Societies are always looking for scapegoats to explain problems that they don't understand. In Europe, a frequent scapegoat has been alien religions, especially Judaism. A lot of the religions were destroyed. If you were either Christian or dead in Europe. A lot of the splinter groups. There were a lot of Protestant splinter groups before Lutheranism was able to take hold, and most of those individuals died. Most of those religions were destroyed as blasphemous. But Judaism, there were lots and lots of people who were Jewish, and they were able to survive in one way or another. And one of the reasons they were allowed to survive is because the Jewish Christians weren't allowed to bank. They weren't allowed to lend money. That was against the precepts of the Bible. And so Jewish people became the bankers of Europe because they were the only ones that were allowed to lend money. Now, from time to time, the royal families or the political structures would run in and kill off and drive away as many Jewish people as they could, and then they'd steal their property or they'd steal their money. As a matter of fact, the famous Spanish Inquisition, the way that Columbus was able to sail the ocean blue in 1492 was because Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand had a big influx of cash because they had just started the Spanish Inquisition, and they had killed off as many Spaniards as they could get a hold of, and a lot of the Spaniards left. There are 2 major groups of Jewish people. The Ashkenazi are the people that live in Eastern Europe, And the Sephardic Jews are the ones that used to live in Spain, but now they pretty much live in North Africa. But they were the ones driven out of Spain by Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand. And they were the ones, they stole their property, and that's where the money came from for Columbus's expedition. In the 14th century, the bubonic plague and other devastating diseases like leprosy swept through Europe. Looking for someone to blame, Europeans began blaming the Jews for poisoning their wells. These beliefs led to pogroms in most European countries, including Germany, Ukraine, and Russia. This is a famous pogrom that happened in 1937. You can see they're stripping the clothes off of people and chasing them through the streets. This lady's in her underwear, and the little boy and the men behind her are beating her with sticks. The pogroms erupted periodically into the 20th century. In the 1920s, the Nazi Party gained power throughout Germany based in part on the platform of blaming all Germany's problems on the Jewish population. Research by Voigtlander and Voth in 2012 disclosed that German cities that had Jewish pogroms in the 14th century were the same cities that had higher rates of violence against Jews in the 1920s and had higher support for the Nazi Party. Because cultures evolve from their past circumstances, the early conditions, this is fascism. You know, I have a little bit of problem with what's going on right now because they're trying to demonize a group called the Antifa. Antifa stands for anti-fascist. Now, once upon a time, we were fighting fascism all over the world. This wasn't that long ago. It was only 60 or 80 years ago. If you have relatives that fought in World War II, it was fascism that they were fighting against. So here, all of a sudden, we've got a conservative movement in the United States that are demonizing the fascist party. They're demonizing people that are anti-fascist. It seems a little odd to me. If my dad were still alive, he would probably be spitting mad because he fought the Nazis all over. He landed at D-Day and he fought them all the way into Germany. And of course, it was fascism he was fighting against. So it seems a little odd to me, and I don't know. Maybe I'm more sensitive to it because my dad was, so throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Of course, I wasn't alive in the 1940s, but throughout the 1950s, that's what it was all about. It was all about stopping the fascists during World War II. So if you ever see a war movie there about World War II, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about fascism and fighting fascism. Because cultures evolve from their past circumstances, the early conditions of a culture matter a great deal with respect to how cultures subsequently evolve. The critical role of early conditions is one important reason that cultural differences can persist across time. Boston was settled by Protestant Puritans. Puritanism Puritanism emphasized respect for authority and the importance of applying wealth and social position to community goals. Many of the original Puritans were highly educated intellectuals, and they felt that their dream of forming a utopia would emerge only from an educated population. Philadelphia was settled by Protestant Quakers. Now, these are both Protestant groups. Maryland was settled by Catholics, but Boston, Massachusetts, they were settled by Puritans. And Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically, was settled by Protestant Quakers. Quakerism emphasizes pragmatic concerns, individual equality, and tolerance. Quakers built the University of Pennsylvania with utilitarian curriculum with medical, business, and engineering schools dominating the university. It still does to this day. The school received little community or financial support from Quaker culture as it had little trust in higher education. Quakers believe that ideas come from heaven. So you're given ideas. So you really don't need somebody else telling you what their ideas are. You get your ideas from heaven, as weird as that is. Puritans were different. These people didn't like each other. Puritans believed that Quakers allowed women to be ministers. Puritanism, of course, would never allow a woman to preach to a man. But of course, the Quakers were very tolerant of very tolerant individuals, and they believed in individual equality. The Puritans built Harvard University using a liberal arts curriculum that emphasized community service. The university received tremendous community and financial support and is today the most heavily endowed private institution in the United States at $32.9 billion. I looked this up. When I was looking at this lecture. It is currently $32.9 billion endowment, which is a lot of money. It costs $1.8 billion for them to run the institution for a year. And here they have an endowment of $32.9 billion. The number of political leaders coming out of Harvard has been strong from its founding until today. Boston's culture has maintained its elitism, the Boston Brahmins, and respect for authority that can be traced back to its Puritan roots. And of course, this is the Boston Brahmin on the top, in the top picture. Philadelphia's culture has remained distrustful of authority and hard to govern, yet tolerant of diversity. And of course, that is a picture of Will Smith when he was rapping. He is an actor now, of course. As people immigrated to Boston and Philadelphia, they tended to adjust themselves to the prevailing cultural traditions as established by the Puritans and the Quakers, respectively. Hence, the cities have been able to maintain their cultural traditions of their forebears. And of course, the picture on top is a picture of a Puritan individual from Boston, and the one in the bottom has to do with a party in Philadelphia. The Philadelphians, very different cities, and this has been going on for a long time. By a long time, Boston and Philadelphia are very different cities. Often we try to figure out what others are thinking when all we have to go on is what the people tell us or our observations of how they behave. Pluralistic ignorance is the tendency for people to collectively misinterpret the thoughts that underlie other people's behavior. A good example of pluralistic ignorance was divulged in the studies done looking at the German people after World War II by Hannah Arendt. And this was a study that was done through the 50s. She wrote it in 1964. Arendt determined that Nazism was not followed because the German people were evil. It was followed because they were thoughtless and conforming. And sometimes that's the way it is. That's the way it is. As you can see, everybody's saluting except one guy right here. Well, I can't point. Anyway, there's one guy that's not saluting. He probably was punished for that. A lot of strange stuff going on right now. Pluralistic ignorance. So we've got, like I said before, we have two different concepts: the conservative movement in the United States and the liberal movement. Right now, it looks like the liberal movement is fairly strong because of Joe Biden and who's running for president. The conservatives seem to be suffering right now because it's more Trumpism than it is a staunch conservatism. It all depends on which channel you watch, whether you watch CNN or MS. If you watch Fox News or you watch somebody else. If you're watching somebody else, you're probably seeing more liberal news, at least not conservative news. Anyway, we're seeing this right now, this pluralistic ignorance. And of course, if you're conservative, you'd say that the liberals have pluralistic ignorance. And if you are liberal, you would say that the conservatives are displaying pluralistic ignorance to the point that people are shooting each other. I mean, it happened in Kenosha. they were having demonstrations against the shooting of Blake. Can't think of his first name. Jacob Blake? No, I don't think it's Jacob. Anyway, a young African American father was shot in the back by the police at point blank range. As horrible as that sounds, they were having demonstrations, and militia types came into Kenosha. Some of the kid that killed the two individuals was from Illinois, and he shot two individuals that I'm not exactly sure why he shot them. Anyway, and he also shot one of the individuals that was on his side. The guy that was wounded was actually one of the militia types. So weird stuff's going on. They had riots in Kenosha last night, and a man was killed. It was, this is going on right now. This whole thing, and of course this stuff, it may hit the fan. We don't know. Before November, all this stuff may happen. Well, keep you posted. You keep me posted. We'll see what happens. Anyway, there we go. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week.